Do you think McDonaldization is as relevant today as it was when you first wrote the book? Do you think it's more relevant, less relevant, relevant in different ways?
Oh, it's much more relevant. I mean, that's another reason for the success of the book, I think, is that, with each passing year, the McDonaldization of our environment and of organizations in which we exist proliferates. I was just speaking outside of Oklahoma City, and we're driving in, I think it was Edmond, Oklahoma, and we're driving on the new main drag in Edmond, Oklahoma, and it's one of these streets which is just one chain store after another, one fast food restaurant after another. And if I think of modern America today, or Main Street, there was this famous book by Sinclair Lewis called Main Street, and his image of Main Street was taken by Disney. The entrance to Disney World is Main Street. Well, that's a Disneyized image of what Sinclair Lewis meant by Main Street. But I think Main Street now in the United States is that kind of road where you can only drive, and you have all of these kind of McDonaldized sort of businesses of one sort or another. So the proliferation of that, of all of the new varieties of these kinds of restaurants and other organizations, churches, for example, have gotten far more McDonaldized. Homes have gotten far more McDonaldized. So we talk about McMansions now, these huge new homes which are enormous, expensive, but highly McDonaldized. Education has certainly grown much more McDonaldized, and with the growth of the internet and distance education and that sort of thing, it can only grow more McDonaldized. And then globally, a few years ago I was speaking in Taipei. Taipei is the most McDonaldized city I've ever been in. There are more fast food places, Starbucks, McDonald's, Burger King, and a 7-Eleven or two on virtually every block. I mean, that's a slight exaggeration, but I don't believe I've ever been in a city which is more McDonaldized than Taipei. And China is rushing headlong in the direction of McDonaldization, with McDonald's and all of the other Starbucks expanding rapidly there. So for all those reasons, I think this is a much bigger phenomenon than when I first started writing about it, and than even I imagined.
What do you see as the future of McDonaldization, both the process and the book?
Well, the process is the book is tied to the process. That is, if McDonald's went out of business tomorrow, I'd either have to rename it Starbuckization, assuming Starbucks continues. So in a strange kind of way, the fate of the book is tied to the success of McDonald's. I was a little bit worried about that, actually, because a few years ago McDonald's was having serious problems, and there was talk of it declining or going out of business. And obviously the decline of McDonald's would not be good for a book, or disappearance of McDonald's would not be good for a book called McDonaldization. So in that kind of odd sort of way, my fate and the fate of the book is tied to McDonald's. But I don't think McDonald's is going anywhere. I mean, they've weathered that storm, and they're adapting and creating, and they've created this system, and in many ways they're still the best at that system. But the other answer is, in another sense, it doesn't matter, because I'm not really interested in McDonald's. It just happens to be the name that I chose. I'm interested in the process. And so whether McDonald's disappears or not is irrelevant to the process, because we might call it Starbuckization, or we might call it Fuddruckization, or Pizza Hutization, or we call all kinds of. We will have new paradigms in the future, but I think this process is not going where. It's just going to continue to expand. We're getting closer and closer to Weber's iron cage.
As I mentioned, there have been quite a few who've criticized McDonaldization for a number of reasons. Perhaps the most popular criticism is that rather than leading to increased homogenization, so that things are becoming increasingly similar, the introduction of McDonald's can actually lead to greater heterogenization, so things are becoming increasingly different thanks to McDonald's. How do you respond to that criticism?
Well, it's true to some extent, but it kind of depends on the way in which you think of homogenization and heterogeneity. The way I see it is that, let's take the spread of McDonald's, the 30,000 or so McDonald's in the world today, as a homogenizing force, because it brings with it its basic food products and its basic principles of operation everywhere it goes in the world. So what some of the critics say is, well, look, it's brought with it this great diversity. Now we've got Taco Bell and Pizza Hut and all of these kind of ethnic foods that are available in various parts of the United States, in various parts of the world that were never there before. In a sense, it's true that here you have Mexican food being sold in places that never had Mexican food before. But on the other hand, from my point of view, it is homogeneity, because basically what Taco Bell has done is to McDonaldize the taco. Pizza Hut has McDonaldized the pizza. So it kind of depends on your perspective. If you look at food diversity, yes, but if you look at it from the basic principles of McDonaldization, I think it is increasing homogeneity. Now, the more serious criticism is that along with the birth of all of these homogenizing fast food restaurants, there has also simultaneously in the United States been this huge expansion in independent restaurants, ethnic restaurants, and various things like that. And I think that's a more persuasive argument, a more persuasive criticism. It's not really a criticism, but I think it is true that side by side with this enormous expansion of the fast food restaurant, you have the expansion of these independent restaurants as well. And I think that's the more interesting development. But I don't really see it as a criticism. Because I never argued that we're going to have total homogenization as a result of the McDonaldization of society.
The book also seems to argue that it's more about the principles of McDonaldization rather than the food or McDonald's itself. That you could just as easily perhaps replace McDonald's with another paradigm, that it's more the principles than the actual content of McDonald's. Is that correct?
Absolutely. As I often say in frustration at certain meetings when I'm being criticized on the issue of food diversity, is I scream out, it's not about the food. It isn't about the food. And I'm not particularly interested in McDonald's. McDonald's is just for me the dominant force in the industry. In the new edition of the book, as you know, I've written about Starbuckization and Starbucks as a new model for the process. But it is, the McDonaldization is defined as the process by which the principles of the fast food restaurant are coming to define more and more sectors of society and more societies around the world. And the definition rests on this notion of the principles, and the principles are efficiency, predictability, calculability, and control. And any entity which emphasizes these principles is, from my point of view, McDonaldizing.
You earlier mentioned Max Weber, that this was kind of an update of his theory that you would replace the paradigm of the bureaucracy with that of the fast food restaurant. How do you respond to the criticism that McDonaldization is really just Weber light?
Well, first of all, I intentionally have written a whole series of books in what you might call a light fashion. I very much wanted to write an accessible book, a readable book. I had spent 15 or 20 years of my life writing works on meta-theory, which were largely inaccessible to many people. And so it is light by design, but I don't think that makes it unserious. The other part of that is that I think the significance of the book, or one of the significances of the book, is that Weber and most other classical theorists applied their theory to the realm of production or to organizations related to production. Writing about McDonaldization turns the focus from the realm of production to the realm of consumption. And as you know, consumption has become a focal interest of mine. And I think more than that, consumption arguably has replaced production, at least in the developed countries, at least in the United States, as the center of society. And so I think, in a way, maybe the most important aspect of that book was to take Weber's argument, update it, change the paradigm, but also extend it and move it from the realm of production to the realm of consumption.
In a world where there's over 1 billion people going hungry, and more than half of the world's population is living on $2 a day or less, how do you respond to the criticism that McDonaldization is really a book about trivial issues, at least trivial to most of the world's population?
Well, I don't think McDonaldization is the most important problem in the world. I don't think it's anywhere close to being the most important problem in the world. There are people dying every day around the world from AIDS and hunger and warfare and the evils of inequality and on and on. And there's no question that those are more important global problems than the problem of McDonaldization. But there are lots of people, there's lots of media that focus on those issues. We're driven as scholars, I think, by what interests us, and this is a process that interests me. It is a process that I think enslaves us in a way in what Weber called the iron cage of rationality, or I would call the iron cage of McDonaldization. And I think we are, since I first wrote the book, or first wrote the essay in 1983, 25 years have passed. And I think it's clear that iron cage of rationalization is stronger, and the bars are stronger than they were 25 years ago. It's the problem that, for whatever strange set of reasons, I've chosen to focus on. And I think it is a problem, but I would not dare to compare it to some of the more serious problems that you indicate in your question.
In light of several of these criticisms, how has the book been revised? It's now in its 5th revision. Have any of those revisions taken into consideration some of these criticisms, and if so, how?
Yeah, I think I'm sensitive to the criticisms. One, for example, is, especially in this edition, is that some of the examples were a bit dated. After all, they go back to 1992 or 3, and in some cases they go back to 1983, and times have changed. So I've tried to update the examples. I've certainly tried to relate the process much more directly to the process of globalization. Things have been added, things have been deleted as times change, and this is the 5th edition of the book, and each time I've done it, I've added and deleted things as a result of criticisms, or as a result of simply rereading the pages and saying, well, I can't leave that in. Those sort of things are less important or have disappeared. The major change, of course, is the chapter on Starbuckization. I think Starbucks has boomed in importance and has continued to grow in importance, and I felt it important to write about it, to address the question of whether if I was writing this book today, would I call it the Starbuckization of society as opposed to the McDonaldization of society, and to basically talk about what it is that Starbucks has done to the McDonald's model, and what's unique about it, if anything.